Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/224, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 224th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, a special kind of look ahead. You know, we don't get to look ahead so much these days. Planning seems to be a thing that was kind of a 2019 thing, right? 2020 and planning does not go together all that much, especially now. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this episode talking a little bit about winter tour planning, because I've got some ideas. I've got some things in my head, and I've got more time on my hands, I think, in this part of the year than I have for the last couple of months. And you know what? I'm thinking bike touring should be a part of all of that. So we're going to spend the entire episode talking about ideas that I've got. And I've got kind of two. Let's start off by talking about the elephant in the room. And that elephant is the same elephant that we've been dealing with all year long. And that is the COVID, the Rona, all of that. I don't want to be flippant about this, because I think that the indications are the numbers are spiking everywhere across the United States. If you are outside of the United States and you have had less of an issue with this, I wish we were there here, but we are not. There is, as expected, a seasonal spike that is on the way. The question ends up being, is that localized? Doesn't seem like it. It seems like it's spread across the country, unlike how it was in the spring, and into a lesser degree in the summer, where it was mostly in the U.S. South. Now it seems to be everywhere. So with this spike that, frankly, we were all expecting, if you were paying attention to anything, if you've paid attention to the history of stuff, the question ends up being, is there a reasonable, responsible winter tour in the cards this season? As I mentioned, the timing is opening up a little bit. That part of that's the holidays. Part of that is my business is somewhat seasonal, for lack of a better way of putting it. So things are a little bit more, well, maybe they're a little bit less intense, shall we say. So as a result, I'm looking to do something in the late fall or in early winter, and doing something on the local side of things, essentially kind of the same idea as before. But, as I've talked about on the show, because I'm constantly in the same spots, it's always a question of, okay, what can I do to make this ride different? I love riding the C&O and I love these local routes, but to a certain degree, I love them because I always try to do it from a different perspective each and every time. So this fall, this late fall, this early winter, I'm looking to do something that is maybe a bad idea. Maybe we're going to file this under bad idea. I'm going to call this the all-weather ride. And this is my idea here. I might seek out bad weather. Today, as I'm sitting here, we had a glorious week. We had at least 7 days in a row of just 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 weather here in the outskirts of the DC region, right along the C&O towpath. So today it was, well, a lot worse. This was more like a good Oregon winter day, where it was raining all day, sometimes heavy at times, and just really lousy weather out. And I have to say, I kind of like foul weather camping. In fact, if you were with us for last week's best of, I even spoke about that. I do like the notion of doing something outdoors, pitching a tent, and having terrible weather around me and being dry and comfortable and happy inside of a tent. So I think that there is something to be said, especially when this region will have its fair share of really nasty, awful days, wet, cold days during the late fall and early parts of the winter. A little bit of a misnomer about this region. We are technically more in the Northeast than I would say, having southern influence. That's for sure. And we don't get snow really until January, February in this area. So even the kind of middle part of winter or the early part of winter tends to be more wet and cold than white and cold, if you know what I mean. And I think that makes riding easier in a sense. Of course, you've got to deal with all of that. But I think that snow and ice is much more difficult for me to traverse. So if we're in a weather pattern where the low 40s is sort of the name of the game, that's terrible, and that may be perfect for the all-weather ride. On this type of a tour, I would not focus on miles, but focus more on finding good techniques for staying warm and dry on the trail. And like I said, when I am successful in that, that tends to be my favorite kind of camping. One of the elements that really is a factor in the sense here of doing less of a focus on miles is the fact that, frankly, you just don't have a lot of sunlight this time of year. It is, as I'm sitting down recording this, a little after 5 o'clock, and it is close to pitch black right now. And it's only going to get darker and darker at this hour for the better part of the next month and change, probably about 6 weeks or so. So if I were to go before the holidays, and the winter solstice, it's going to be getting dark at the 4 o'clock hour. So the idea of doing, 60, 70 miles in a day, it's kind of tough to do with any kind of sense of breaks. The other thing that I would say, though, is during this time of year when I'm riding, I don't take a lot of breaks because, frankly, you get off the bike, you get cold. If you're on the bike, you stay warm. And, well, that's something that you really want to keep on doing. A local ride keeps me away from others. So even as we are seeing infections rise, I'll focus on staying self-contained. And I think I'm going to be redoubling my efforts in that sense because the fact that it's going to be, not as nice weather means that there are going to be far fewer riders on the trail. So I think that between all of those factors, I think that this ends up being a really good bet for a fun, a type 2 kind of fun, interesting ride. And again, it would be a much more of a focus on staying self-contained, maybe only riding somewhere in the realm of maybe like 20 miles or so in a given day, because again, I'll get to camp and it takes a while to kind of get things set up. It also takes a while if it is truly foul weather and it's wet out, and making sure that you get the tent set up and then you're segregating wet things from non-wet things. I think it'll actually be kind of an interesting thing. And frankly, I think it might be good for podcasts because you might hear me complain an awful lot. And that is always good. And of course, we all know that when I do bike touring podcasts, it really ends up being more of a hyper-local weather report for the course of the entire time. So it's perfect for that. So that's where I've been sort of focusing on the all-weather ride. I don't know when this would happen. I don't know if this would happen before the holidays, around the holidays, or whatever. A lot's going to be kind of dependent on a variety of different factors that are available to me, and sort of how the year sort of ends up ending. Also, again, with the way the infections are going, that may end up causing me to want to stay inside the house even more. So we shall see. But that is sort of one of the tours that is on my list. I think that it would be very focused on comfort, and maybe some new techniques as well that I would be very happy to end up sharing with all of you. I'm curious if anybody else has got the gumption to do a tour intending to go into bad weather. It's sort of like the George Costanza Seinfeld reference here for those of you who have not seen the television program Seinfeld from the 1990s. George Costanza, that's the bald character, Jerry's friend. He, in one episode, he famously finds great success by just doing the opposite of what he would normally do, and it ends up working out for him. This is sort of that. Like it's doing the opposite of what I would ordinarily do on a bike tour. Normally, I would want to go in the summer or when the weather is nice, and I think I'm going to try to choose the worst possible weather I can possibly get. So we're looking forward to the all-weather ride as a possibility coming up in the future. It may mean that I end up doing the ride kind of like all at once and out of nowhere. So you may end up getting a tour journal without me saying, oh, by the way, there's a tour journal coming next week. I mean, just drop on you on one particular Thursday coming up. So that is the all-weather ride. The other one, the second ride that I've been thinking about is frankly a little more aspirational. And this is the one that I've been kind of missing a little bit. And that is to consider doing another trip to Florida during later on, potentially in the late winter, maybe not so much late winter, but the midwinter months, in that kind of late January, early February kind of time frame. I want to say at the outset that I am leaning against this pretty heavily at this point. And I do want to mention it here on the show at the top because I don't want anybody to think that I'm planning on traveling far in the middle of all of this, because, if things are going to go the direction that I think they're going to be going in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be having some really tough times from an infections perspective here in the US. And I don't want anybody to think that I haven't thought about that very deeply before I go into all of this. I think that this is going to be contingent on maybe that not happening, or maybe not happening so badly, or there's talk that there might be even a vaccine that could come out within the next series of months, which would be kind of amazing. So, this is aspirational and functioning only if this makes sense. And I think that in the here and now, traveling from the DC area to Florida is probably not the greatest of ideas, even though I know lots of people do it. It doesn't work necessarily for me. But if I can, consistent with my values and consistent with a safe and reasonable bit of travel, it's really interesting. You could tell I put some thought into this. I think that my partner Kimberly is getting a little bit of cabin fever in a sense. Neither she nor I have traveled very far from Washington, D.C. since all of this began. Really no further than, for her, she dropped me off in Cumberland, Maryland. So she's not gone any further from Washington, D.C. than Cumberland, Maryland at all. And I have gone no further than from there. I actually bicycled, as you all know, because you hopefully heard the podcast, to Connellsville, PA. So really, we have not traveled very far. We are used to being big time travelers. We will bring the dogs with us. We will do big long road trips. We will fly internationally. We have friends in Montreal that we visit every year that we didn't get to visit this year. So, I think that we are looking for a trip that, scratches that itch. And so when we were talking about this before the infections really spiked, we were talking about maybe doing a road trip to someplace fun. And that, of course, that can be fun during these days, and what's available, it's a giant crapshoot, right? And then when you have 3 dogs, trust me, that narrows things down a lot. But as it turns out, just curvature of the earth, geography, etc. Central Florida, and more to the point, the Central Florida coast is a long single-day drive from here where I'm sitting at the cabin in West Virginia. And I think that because it is a reasonable one-day drive, and because of the way that we would do that kind of a drive to a fixed place that we would stay at, much like what we did this summer when we went to Virginia. Oh, I guess we went further away than Cumberland. I guess we went to the Virginia coast. I'm not sure if that's any further away. Sorry, that was a sidebar. But in any event, when we went to the Delmarva Peninsula this summer, we did it in a smart way. We went to one spot. When we did go out to enjoy things in that town, it was always outdoors. We always did the social distancing, things like that. I think that would be the model for a Florida trip. The only difference, of course, would be the drive would be much longer, and our Airbnb would be in, Florida instead of on the coast of Virginia. From there, looking at renting an Airbnb for the dogs, that's dog friendly and Kimberly friendly. From there, I would look to do what I'm going to call the Cross Florida 3 Sunshine State Loop Tour. And what I would do is, if we were on the Atlantic coast, which is the most likely spot because it is the closest to drive to, we'd start there. Would that be in Daytona? Would that be in Cocoa? I don't know. Somewhere along that Space Coast, potentially. Do a ride from there to Orlando and back. And that would probably be about a 3-day loop, depending on how I space things out. How would I do it? I would probably bring the big bike. I would conceivably look at possibly doing some camping this time. Maybe a mix of camping and hotels. I don't know. I haven't really put that much thought into it. But the idea here would be that the touring part of this would be as low contact as possible, focusing on going from place to place with gas station contact only. In terms of the driving and in terms of the touring models, it would be basically, I would try to minimize as much contact as possible with food sources and things like that. I want to do this. I think it would be a lot of fun. I think it would be a good tour. I've enjoyed my January/February rides in the state of Florida the last couple of years. I think that the biggest reason is that it keeps me touring year round. And I think also it would be nice to have a nice change of pace, like a different look, different type of touring. But of course, there's all sorts of factors that are breaking against all of that, not the least of which is, that's a long way to travel. That's certainly traveling to through different states that are all on the list that, when we come back, we'd have to get COVID tests and all that other kind of stuff. But I think it's in the realm of possible if things break a certain way. And of course, again, vaccine comes out, all those other things, maybe having some kind of a plan would be something to look forward to, and maybe the vaccine could play into all of that. But as I said at the top, when I threw caveat after caveat at you on this, I think that this is more aspirational than anything else. One of the things I know that when I've talked to people, whether here to you on this podcast or in other contexts, is that these tours, they're going to be there. It's not like I'm going to miss out on riding in Florida if I don't do it in January or February, maybe in March, maybe in April, or maybe later in the year. And maybe it is going to be one of those things that, this type of travel is just not a good idea for a little bit while longer. And, if I've waited, what is it now? We're 8 months in, roughly, from when I'm sitting here right now, from when sort of all of this started here in the States. If I've waited 8 months, is it that big of a deal to wait another 4 more or 6 more? I think that's all part of the analysis. And I'm being open about all of this for you, gentle listener, because I know not everybody necessarily has the same kind of sense of what works for them as I do. But this is something that I feel like is important to me. I think that my mantra that I've repeated a lot from a touring perspective is that I don't want to catch this because it sounds like it sucks. And we also don't know what the long-term effects are, even if you do survive it, which most people do, of course. But more importantly, I don't want to give it to anybody else because that perpetuates this whole thing. That's why we are in the position where we're at. And bike touring would be a terrible reason to pass this on to anybody else. So that is why I spend a lot of time thinking about these things, and why also I think the whole reason kind of to get to the end of all of this is that I've talked about before that sometimes planning a trip is almost as fun and almost as helpful to my psyche, to me, as it is to actually go out and ride it. So what I may end up doing is to sort of plan this out, sketch this out, do the research, get maybe reservations made, although that might be a possibility as well, especially if the cancellation policies are flexible, shall we say, for a variety of these different places, and consider maybe kind of piecing it together and having dates in mind where cancellation, kind of a no-go, a drop-dead date would be in terms of all of this. Or maybe just keep it kind of written down on paper. If you're around for last week's episode, you'll notice that I often have a lot of tours in my head that, again, are aspirational. And they are the types of tours that I like kind of coming up to a certain point and then saying, okay, I'm going to leave the real detailed planning for when I'm actually going to do it. I think I'm sort of at that stage with this Cross Florida 3 Sunshine State Loop. By the way, I've already named it. That I think that it would be okay for me to plan this. if it happens this year, well, I guess it would be next year, wouldn't it? If it happens in 2021, that would be because it is consistent with my values and the ability to keep it safe and keep it reasonable and keep it responsible. If I don't do it, you know what? There's always 2022, which seems weird to say, right? Doesn't it sound like now that we're in like 2021, 2022? Well, maybe it's just for a middle-aged dude like me. This all sounds like, man, rocket ships and rocket backpacks and stuff like that. Man, I keep waiting for flying cars. I thought there'd be flying cars by this point, but clearly not. Just bicycles and bicycle tours. So, to sum it all up, now that you have listened to me for the last 20 minutes opining, I think that there are two possible rides for me. The foul weather ride, also known as the all-weather ride, but I think it's going to be the foul weather ride sometime this late fall into the early winter. And then the aspirational, if this can be done in a good, safe way, the Cross Florida 3 Sunshine State Loop. I am really curious what else is going on out there. For those of you who are down under, I know it's starting to become summer, so there might be more opportunities for you in the Southern Hemisphere to go out and responsibly do some touring in better weather. But if you're in Europe, if you're in the States, are you doing tours and what are they looking like? Are you making plans now, or are you looking forward to a fall and winter in the States, at least, where you're going to be hunkering down because of the COVID situation? Curious what you are all doing. I just shared what I am looking at doing in the late fall, early winter. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours like the Kessel Run. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Stuart Buchan, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Dan Gebhardt, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemas, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latois Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Tom Bilch, Ronald Piroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lecko, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCulloch, John Hickman, Jack Smith, Carl Presso, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Dave Fletcher, James Stratakis, David Neves, Mike Lazewski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, and thanks also to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.